It's off.
And I don't know why they never fixed it. Oh, it's still a minute early. Transitional decade. Okay, guys, remember, you got your quiz, last of the extra quizzes that starts at 11. So by the time this video is posted for you guys, quiz will be long gone, but hopefully y'all will do as good as you possibly can on it. And remember, next week we come back for our last week of learning, and then y'all are going to have your final online. And it's going to be pretty much the same as the midterm, where you'll have about 20 questions, 50 minutes to complete it. You all ready? You ready? A transitional decade, the period from 1972 to 1979. Now, this decade starts out with a scandal, thanks to Houston banker Frank Sharp, who basically offered loans to legislatures to get them to buy his stock at a very low price, and then it would be sold at a much higher price. Well, the Securities and Exchange Commission looked into his shenanigans. Sharp, of course, was found guilty, and Watergate happened soon after, which, of course, made people trust government even less. Now, Watergate, basically the scandal was a bunch of plumbers that were out to fix leaks, led by G. Gordon Liddy, broke into the Democratic National Headquarters at the Watergate Hotel in Washington, D.C., and they were discovered. Now, there were several Texans who were involved in the investigative committees, but perhaps the one who received the most notoriety was Barbara Jordan. And of course, consequences of Watergate, not only did it make people distrust the government, but it sharpened also the division within the Democratic Party of conservative Democrats and the progressive Democrats. Meanwhile, here in Texas, we have another governor's race. Dole Briscoe wins the governorship, even though he had less than 50% of the vote. And underneath his guidance, basically it was prosperous times for Texas. But then in 1978, Dallasite William P. Bill Clements runs and wins the governor position. Now he had a rags to riches story. He was born very poor. He was able to get into SMU. After graduating from SMU, he got together with two of his fellows at SMU. And they basically went out and acquired and discovered some oil fields. And some growing trends that happened underneath Bill Clements. Was you had more and more of an alliance between Protestant churches and conservatives. As well as the fact that you had some conservative Democrats beginning to shift to the Republican Party. And those trends, by the way, were national, not merely just Texas. But most sharply connected to the southern U.S. Well, but then they wanted to try and fix the state constitution, which we had had since 1876. They began the process of revising it in 1971. Trying to add 8 new amendments. Even though there was a lot of disagreement over the definition of right to work, that is very pro-business. And so in 1972, according to Texas law, they have to take any amendment to the Constitution to the people to vote on it. And the people do not accept the new constitutional amendments. So basically, nothing happens. And basically, you have to pass amendments to change things legally here in Texas. So since it was passed back in 1876, there are more than 690 amendments to the Texas State Constitution. And possibly even more, since this book has been published. But maybe not, because our legislature only meets once every 2 years. Well, you start to see the rise of La Raza Unida party. Or the Race United. Basically, this political party was founded by Jose Angel Gutierrez and Mario Compián. Its initials was the RUP, Raza Unida. Basically, they wanted to be a political force for change for Tejanos by achieving greater economic, social, and political self-determination. Ramsey Muniz was their candidate for governor. And they probably reached the height of their popularity in 1974. And attempts to further unify and strengthen their party actually worked against them. Especially as you have the Democratic Party that was really going out and seeking to attract the Hispanic vote. You know, that's usually what happens to third parties here in America, is they'll have an idea, and usually their new ideas, if it proves to be popular, then one or the other political party tries to absorb that into their own platform. Meanwhile, women's rights and political representation. In 1972, Texas approved the Equal Rights Amendment. Narrowly, it won here in Texas, making Texas the first southern state to ratify it. We have the first chapter of National Organization for Women, or NOW, opened up, I believe, in Houston in 1973. Again, in Houston in 1977, they held the National Women's Conference. And even though the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, people always point out that Jerry Falwell and Phyllis Schlafly picked up a good opposition against it. And this is the only constitutional amendment, because usually constitutional amendments are just given 6 months. And if they don't have 3/4 of the states in 6 months, then it's considered a failure. While they actually gave this amendment a 6-month extension to try to get the votes that were needed. And at the end of the day, they were 3 states shy. Of getting 3/4 of the states. Now, does the fact that they have that setback mean that women are being limited? No. In 1973, Roe v. Wade was heard. Basically, that was against Jane Doe. an unidentified woman at the time, and Dallas District Attorney Henry Wade, who prohibited Doe from getting a first trimester abortion. It went up all the way to the Supreme Court. And basically, women have the right now to have an abortion. In all 50 states. And if Roe v. Wade was overturned, as you heard in the last election, a lot of people getting real scared about it and trying to do fear mongering, well, that would mean that it would just go back to the states. If the states wanted to have abortions for their populace, or if they didn't. Meanwhile, also in 1972, Title IX of the Educational Amendments to the Civil Rights Act was passed, basically saying for every dollar you spend on a male sport, you have to spend $1 on female sports, if it's a tax-supported institution, which was a boom for female sports. But it did hurt some of the men's athletic programs. But it did increase opportunity. And now, of course, we're still trying to figure out what to do with transgender, how they fit into gender sports. Also, during this time, you had a lot of Texas politicians getting their start. Like the woman who would go on to become a U.S. Senator, Kay Bailey Hutchinson, Republican. Ann Richards, who got on the county commission in Travis County. She later would become a very popular governor who fought doggedly not only for the rights of women but also children. As well as Carol Keaton McClellan, who you might know better as Carol Ryder Strayhorn. Oh, and Ann Richards was a Democrat. And I believe she's buried in the Texas State Cemetery. I'm not certain. Oil in the 1970s. By 1972, Texas companies refined 1.3 billion barrels of oil, making it that an average of about 3.5 million barrels a day, getting refined here in Texas. Texas, of course, becomes even more important in 1973, when the Organization of Petrol Exporting Countries, or OPEC, puts an embargo on the United States due to our support of Israel in the Yom Kippur War. And basically this embargo made the cost of gas increase 5 times. Oh, and by the way, you couldn't get all the gas you wanted. Depending if your license plate ended in an odd or an even number, you could get gas on certain days but not other days. You'd have to wait in long lines. And then they might run out of gas by the time you get to the pump. And as you can guess, do you remember when we got hit with that little oil when Saudi stopped producing as much oil and the price doubled? It went from like $2 to $4 a gallon, in some places $5. Of course, we live in Texas, so we've got it kind of a little simple. But imagine if instead it had gone up 5 times, from $2 a gallon to $10 a gallon. Because that's what the effect of that was. And needless to say, here in Texas, we got oil. So that helped out some of the companies. I believe Humble Oil, which was part of the breakup of Standard Oil, organized with another company, and Exxon was formed, which now is the world's largest petroleum company. Well, we don't just got oil, we got a whole bunch of new industries. Like here in Dallas, we had Texas Instruments. They came out with like hand calculators. And by the way, these hand calculators, there was just as much electronic capability in those as there was on the capsules that took the astronauts to the moon. So this was a huge leap forward. Also, they had like speech synthesizers. There's a toy called Speak and Spell. Spell, dog, D-O-G, dog. Also, Dallas had electronic data systems, or EDS. That basically was a huge store of memory. Got a lot of government contracts to do like welfare. H. Ross Perot was their head, the guy who donated all that money to get the Perot Museum off the ground. He tried to do a helicopter mission to rescue our hostages in Iran. That ended up in a total fiasco. We're also doing incredible in aviation. In 1972, 22,604 people dealt with aviation industries. By 2000, that's up to 119,000 jobs. In 1979, American Airlines moved their headquarters from New York to Fort Worth, flying out of the brand new DFW airport. Braniff International, they were a huge headline that was based out of Love Field here in Dallas. But basically the oil crash was not kind to them at all, and they couldn't afford to stay in business. And it was just about that time, back in 1971, when you had almost everybody leaving Love Field to go out to the new, larger DFW airport. There was a little airline called Southwest Airlines that just tried, no frills, no benefits, just like trips from Dallas to Houston, Dallas to Austin, Dallas to San Antonio. Thanks to something called the Wright Amendment, they couldn't fly more than one state outside of Texas. They had to do a stopover in that state. And Southwest fought like anything to get that repealed. And it finally was. And the reason why you had the Wright Amendment passed in the first place is because they wanted to ensure that the new airport, DFW, would be profitable. And Southwest, once they did get the Wright Amendment moved, they did have to give up some of their gates at Love Field. But they still kind of have a monopoly over that airport. Ranching and farming. Well, in Texas, farming had been on the decrease since World War II. Even though Texas has the most farmland of all the states, by the 1970s, only 5% of the populace of Texas are still involved in farming or ranching. What are the complications that the farmers are having to face? Well, basically we got overseas competition where the standard of living is much lower, so they can afford to sell things cheaper. Also, some of the government subsidies that had been supporting farmers were removed. So you have a rise of part-time farmers and ranchers. Basically people that might tend to the animals in the morning, then go off, do their job, come back, tend to the animals again, and do it on the weekends. Either that or you have some families, like out in West Texas, that will hire people to come and work the land. They'll own it, but they won't work it. They won't do the farm. And usually this guy will do many farms. Ready for the next one? All right, Texas and literature, television, and film. Well, one of the big writers during this time was Larry McMurray. Some of the books that have been turned into movies that he's written were like Lonesome Dove, The Last Picture Show, Brokeback Mountain. The TV show Dallas depicted the good old Ewing family internationally. And the South Fork Ranch, that's just a stone's throw from Plano. You ever been out South Fork Ranch? Then just go down Parker Road.
We drive by it all the time.
I think it's still open for tours. I don't know who visits it, but I think also they have a big dance hall or something up there.
We have a lot of camping concerts there, yeah.
Also, you had Urban Cowboy, which kind of popularized a country and western bar out in Pasadena, Texas. Gillies. That was founded by a country and western singer. Gillies has since burned down. But if you're in the hankering for that, have you ever been over to, what is it, the Stockyards over in Fort Worth? That's nice. I mean, it's kind of a country and western place. The influence of Texas musicians. Well, we had Willie Nelson, who was born in Abbott, Texas. Went to Nashville, tried to play by the rules. They kick him out of Nashville. Or actually, he leaves Nashville. Comes back to Texas, where he gets together with Waylon Jennings, who was born out in Littlefield. A Tejano artist who became quite popular was Freddie Fender. Even though he was born in Valdemar Huerta. I can't believe I forgot to put him up there. Chris Christopherson was born in Brownsville, Texas. He wrote Me and Bobby McGee, song that got Janis Joplin her fame.
Chris Christopherson?
Mm-hmm. And he was also a Rhodes Scholar. His first big song was Sunday Morning Coming Down, but you'd have to know Johnny Cash. Yeah, he was a helicopter, he was a ranger and a helicopter pilot in Vietnam. And anyway, he comes back, he gets a job in Nashville, and he gets a letter from his mom telling him, hey look, we disown you, you're not a part of our family anymore, you shouldn't be doing this songwriting. And Johnny Cash was in the studio on that day, and apparently somebody told him about the letter that he had received. And Johnny Cash went in and said, yeah, nothing like getting letters from family, huh? Anyway, he worked for him, and then, you know, he said, I'm not going to work at the studio anymore, I'm just going to write music. And he's starving and everything like that. He scrumps up the last little pieces he has, rents a helicopter, flies that helicopter out to Johnny Cash's house, lands in his front yard, and hands him the demo reel with Sunday Morning Coming Down. And that's what started his explosion on the movie scene. By the mid-70s, the PBS station in Austin is producing Austin City Limits. Bringing as well as exposing, well, bringing more musicians to Texas and exposing the talent that we do have. The rise of Major League Sports here in Texas. For a little while here in Dallas, we had the NFL team, the Dallas Cowboys, and we had an AFL team, the Dallas Texans. They both played in the Cotton Bowl. But by 1963, basically the Dallas Texans head up to Kansas City, and they become the Kansas City Chiefs. And by 1971, we have Texas Stadium out in Irving. What about Houston? Well, Houston has the Oilers that play out of the Astrodome. Which was the world's first completely enclosed stadium, making it the 8th wonder of the world. And one of the most famous players that played for them was the 1977 Heisman Trophy winner, Earl Campbell, who graduated from UT Austin. And it was so funny in the Astrodome because it was enclosed. They were trying to figure out how can we keep the grass alive. Because at first they tried windows, but then it got too hot inside. They tried to paint the roof white, but that wasn't good for the baseball games that they played in there. Until finally they came up with AstroTurf, the synthetic grass. Went there. In basketball, we have 3 major NBA teams. San Antonio got their Spurs in 1973. Houston got the Rockets in 1971. Dallas, which had the Chaparrals, and had tried 4 times to get an NBA expansion team. We finally were able to get one in 1979. But it was after the season was over, so their first year of actual playing was 1980, down in Reunion Arena. Uh-oh, wrong way, Roman. Then in baseball, in 1960, Houston gets an expansion team, making us the first southern city awarded a league franchise. They got the Colt 45s, which they later changed their name to the Astros, for the Astrodome where they played. Not to be confused with Astro World, that was located across the street. And like I told you, they had to they invented AstroTurf as a way to solve the dilemma of keeping the grass green. Now, beyond just they played baseball in there, they played football, they played basketball, and you also had the rodeo championship there. And in 1973, Billie Jean King and Bobby Riggs had a battle of the sexes that they turned into a comedy a few years back. Did you ever see that one? The guy who, it stars the guy who's the Michael in The Office. He plays Bobby Riggs, who basically he had been a tennis professional. He was bragging about how much better men were than women. And Billie Jean King, a young up-and-comer, was able to defeat him. And here in Dallas, we weren't left out of the game, because in 1971, we were able to get the Washington Senators, and we changed their name to the Texas Rangers. And they played out at that field in Arlington Stadium for the longest. That's it. Hey, hey. So once again, I hope everybody has a happy Thanksgiving. Best of luck on your quiz.